So inevitably, when I'm helping first-time homebuyers, one of the questions that always pops up is what happens if I get into escrow, but then I decide for some reason that I don't want the home? Is there a way to get out of escrow, and am I able to get my money back if I do so, and what does that process look like? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about on today's episode, so let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so really quick, before we talk about how you can possibly get out of escrow if you get yourself into a situation where you need to, I want to give you a little bit of a background, especially if you're a first-time home buyer, because you're going to need to know this information to make sense as we continue through this conversation. So in California, when you fill out a purchase contract and when you purchase a home, typically you're going to put down what's called an earnest money deposit of anywhere from 1% to 3% of the purchase price of the home in escrow within the first few days of opening up. So what that basically is a down payment on your down payment. So basically, let's say you're trying to put a 10% down payment down and you have a 2% earnest money up front. So when you first open escrow, you put that 2% in, and then at the very end of escrow, you're going to deposit that other 8% for the total of 10%. Now again, this money will become important later on in the conversation, but I want to make sure you have that fundamental understanding before we continue on. So now let's go ahead and say that after months of looking and after lots of offers placed, especially in the seller's market, you finally get into escrow on a property. However, now that you're in escrow, you're wondering, wait a second, can I get out of escrow if something is wrong with this property? Well, the quick answer is going to be maybe. I know it's the answer that everybody loves to hear, but really it's all going to depend on one thing, and that is what you put in the purchase contract. This is why it's extremely important that before you just blindly sign something that your real estate agent sends you, that you understand that purchase contract and what you're actually signing. So let's go ahead and go over exactly what you need to know about that purchase contract to make sure you're setting yourself up for success and giving yourself options to get out of the contract if you need to. Okay, so in the purchase contract, there are going to be contingencies. And if you don't understand or know what a contingency is, basically the easiest way to explain it is a protection put in place for you as a buyer that's going to be able to give you outs to get out of escrow if something were to happen while you're going through the process. However, it's not just for any blanket thing that could happen during escrow where you change your mind. There's specific things in these contingencies that give you that out. So let's go ahead and go over the three main ones that are going to give you the best shot of getting out of escrow if something were to happen. So the three main contingencies are the inspection contingency, the appraisal contingency, and then the loan contingency. Now keep in mind that if you're doing an all cash offer, those last two, the appraisal and the loan contingency, are optional. However, if you're getting a loan for the property, which is typical, especially for most first-time home buyers, then you are going to have those three major ones in almost every single home purchase that you have. So let's go ahead and start with the inspection contingency. So the inspection contingency is basically there, as the name implies, to allow you to inspect the property to see if you can find anything wrong about it that would prevent you from wanting to move forward and actually purchasing it. So typically what you're going to do when you get into escrow is you're going to hire a general inspector who's going to go through the property with a fine-tooth comb and try to look at all the major systems and figure out if there's anything wrong with the home, whether it be a light switch not working or the entire HVAC system not operational. They're going to try to give you a general report card on exactly what is wrong with that home and possible issues that you might run into. And then on top of that, typically, if they find a lot of issues in a certain section, let's say there's a lot of electrical issues or a lot of plumbing issues, they might recommend additional inspections for you to have and tell you to have an electrician go out there or a plumber go out there and look at these items in a little bit better detail, as well as possibly giving you quotes on how much it would cost to fix something, so that way you have more information available before you decide to move forward and purchase that home. Now, after you have all those inspections done, typically you're going to talk to your real estate agent, and then you're going to come up with a repair request to basically send to the seller, and it's an itemized list saying these are the things that are wrong with the property that I'm not really comfortable with, and I'd like you to address, whether they fix it or give you some type of credit at the end of escrow so you can go ahead and fix it yourself. You're going to ask for that list of things to be taken care of. Now, the seller can respond back with almost anything. They can say, yes, we'll take care of all of it. No, we'll take care of a few of them and give you credit for a few of them. Or because it's California and all homes are sold as is, they can say no to everything. They have no obligation to fix anything in that repair request. However, it's up to you to determine what you're comfortable with in terms of the problems of the house based on what the seller does or doesn't agree to do to the property. Now, this is where the contingency typically comes in. So let's go ahead and say that you and the seller are negotiating back and forth and you just can't come to an agreement. There's a couple things major wrong with the property. Let's say there's a foundation issue, there's some electrical issues, and the seller just doesn't want to take care of it and they don't want to pay for it to get fixed. Well, at that point, you have an inspection contingency. So as long as you wrote that contingency into the contract and have it in place, you're going to be allowed to back out of escrow, say we can't come to an agreement with the seller, so there's no deal to be had here. And in most cases, you're going to be able to get that full earnest money deposit back as well, so you can go ahead and find a new property to go into escrow with. So as a buyer, this can give you a lot of confidence going into escrow, knowing that if you do find a major problem, it's not something you're going to be stuck with. It's always going to be your choice if you want to move forward in escrow with that seller based on the condition of the house. And if you're not comfortable with it, you can back out of escrow and there's going to be very little penalty for you to do so. Really, the biggest penalty on your end is typically going to be the cost of the inspection, because once the inspection's done, that fee is not going to be refundable. So the service has already been performed. So if you had a general inspection, which typically right now costs around $600, $700, and let's say you had an additional inspection out there for a plumber and they maybe charged you $200 to go out and look at something, that $800 that you spent is something that you're just going to have to unfortunately be okay with. And it's kind of the cost of finding out that this property is not the right one for you. And in the long run, that $800 probably saved you a lot more money because the home was probably in a condition that you weren't comfortable with. Now, on the other hand, if you and the seller can both come to an agreement on the condition of the property and anything that they might need to fix in order for you to feel comfortable moving forward with it, at that point, you can confidently remove that inspection contingency and you're telling the seller that I am comfortable with the condition of the house and what you agreed or didn't agree to do before I take ownership of it, so I no longer need that contingency in place. Now, once that contingency is removed, you can no longer go back and say, well, I changed my mind, I didn't like these 3 things, can you please fix them? At that point, you're locked into the condition of the property and you need to be okay with it. So before you remove that inspection contingency, again, you want to make sure you're having that conversation with your agent and feel fully comfortable with the condition of the property before moving forward. So the second major contingency is the appraisal contingency. So again, when you get a loan for a property, typically the lender is going to require a third-party appraising company to go out there, and they're basically just trying to secure that loan and make sure that what you're offering to pay for the home is actually what it's worth. So the appraiser is going to go out there, typically within the first week of opening escrow. They're going to go through, take pictures of the property, measure the property, and then go back and do something very similar that most real estate agents do, which is look at comparable sales and figure out an independent valuation of that property. Now, when they take that report and give it back to the lender, as long as it comes back at the same value that you offered, or if it comes back higher than the value that you offered, then there's no problem. Because if it came back higher, that basically means that you got a great deal on the property and the home is valued higher than what you paid for it. In today's market, not very likely, but it does happen occasionally. The only time you ever have a problem with the appraisal is if that appraisal comes back lower than what you offered to pay. So let's say you offered to pay $800,000 for the home and the appraiser only thinks it's worth $750,000. Well, the lender can only give you a loan now for up to that $750,000. So there's a $50,000 gap that needs to be taken care of. Now, there's a couple ways that you can go about this, but basically between you and the seller, you're going to have to figure out what you're going to do with that $50,000 gap. You can ask the seller to bring their price down by $50,000, so that way you can still get a loan for the property. You can come in with cash to be able to cover some or all of the difference of that $50,000, and as long as the seller is willing to come down a little bit, you're willing to go up a little bit, and you can meet somewhere in the middle, then you can continue with that escrow. But if the seller is unwilling to budge and you don't have the money or you don't want to come out of pocket to make up that $50,000, That's why you have that appraisal contingency in place. You're able to tell the seller, I have the appraisal contingency, the appraisal didn't come in at value, so therefore I am not going to purchase this home. You can back out of escrow and then again, go find another property that's going to work better for you. Now again, just like with the inspection contingency, the only possible downside is oftentimes the lender will have you pay for the appraisal up front, which means if that happens and it's a service performed, you're not going to get that money back. And again, typically those appraisers are going to charge you $500, $600, $700 depending on the type of the property. So that is money that comes out of your pocket that you're not getting back, but you still have that ability to get out of escrow and again, go find another property that's going to work better for you. And then the third major contingency is the loan contingency. So this one has everything to do with the lender that you're using. They're basically going through, once you get into escrow, and finalizing all their documents to make sure they can actually give you the loan for the property. So typically they're going to be asking for updated paycheck stubs. They want to see updated bank statements. They want to make sure that you're financially in the same type of position you were when they originally looked at your finances and gave you that pre-approval to purchase the home. So they're going through and their underwriting team is looking at every document, make sure every T is crossed, every I is dotted, and verifying that you can fully meet the qualifications to be able to purchase that home. Now again, if the lender goes through some of these things and then all of a sudden they find something that's going to prevent you from getting a loan on the property, as long as you have that loan contingency in place, you're going to be able to tell the seller, the lender thought they could give me that loan. However, it turns out something popped up they didn't see before and they can no longer give me that loan. So therefore, I'm going to need to back out of escrow and again, get that earnest money deposit back and go find a new home. Now, on the opposite side of things, if the lender does go through and finds out everything is good to go, there's no problems, they went through all the secondary paperwork and everything is ready, then in that case, you're going to be able to remove that loan contingency. And typically, in a lot of transactions, that's usually the final contingency to be removed. And the reason that I emphasize that is that now we're coming back to that earnest money deposit. As long as you have a contingency in place in the contract that you haven't removed yet, you're able to get that earnest money deposit back if you back out of escrow. However, once you remove that final contingency, that is when you are going to be locked into purchasing that property. And if anything were to happen where you couldn't purchase that property, that earnest money deposit you put in at the very beginning, that 1% to 3% of the purchase price, therefore is going to be forfeited to the seller in most cases. So that's why it's extremely important before you remove that final contingency that everything looks good on the loan, everything is ready to go, and there's not going to be anything that pops up last minute that could cause an issue, because if it does, it can cause a major problem for you where you're going to be out a lot of money because you weren't able to get the loan for the property and weren't able to close on that property after you told the seller that you could by removing all of those contingencies. Now, one other thing to know about contingencies is you'll notice I didn't mention any type of second thought contingencies. So there's nothing in there that's going to say, you know what, I just don't like this property. The inspection looks fine, the appraisal looks good, the loan looks good. I just want to get out of escrow. Those type of contingencies don't exist. So you need to be confident when you go into escrow that you like the property and that you are going to have a good chance of closing that property and living in that home. So it's extremely important that before you go into escrow, you really have that list of must-haves dialed in and you understand the ramifications of going into escrow, so that way you don't get in escrow, change your mind right away, and then have to try to figure out a way to get out of escrow. But because the contingency periods are not just a get out of jail free card, you want to make sure that if you're using them as they're intended, either for an inspection issue, an appraisal issue, or a loan issue. So again, it's something that you want to make sure that you're confident going into escrow before you get your offer accepted, and the contingencies are there to keep you safe during the transaction and allow you to get out of it if something major would have happened that would prevent you from purchasing that home. So now that we've talked about these contingencies so you can understand what they are and how to use them, I also want to make sure that you understand that these can be changed inside that purchase agreement, which is why it's so important that you understand that purchase agreement, again, before you actually place an offer, because out of the gate, you do have contingencies that you can check mark saying, yes, we have this contingency, but it could also be check marked no. And if you don't know the difference or don't know what you're signing, that can cause a major issue, because if you don't have those contingencies protecting you, there's going to be a lot more risk for you as a buyer. Now, on the opposite side of things, on the seller side, you also want to make sure that as you're writing the contract, you're looking at it at a seller's point of view too. So the seller, knowing that once you remove that final contingency is when you get locked into the property. If you're in a very competitive market, oftentimes it is not uncommon for you to have to reduce the amount of time you have for those contingencies. So typically in California, the time that you have is going to be 17 days from when you go into escrow to basically go through, inspect the property, get it appraised, get the loan finalized. However, in today's seller's market, it's not uncommon to see buyers have to reduce those to a smaller amount because the shorter those time periods are, the more confident the seller is going to be that they're going to be able to lock you into escrow quicker, and it will make your offer stronger. So the biggest thing that you need to be focusing on as a buyer is where is that sweet spot where I can maybe reduce the contingencies but keep myself fully protected at the same time. And if you're interested on how you can do that, I highly recommend, if you haven't already, you can check out this video right up here where I go over the top tips that I have on how to write a competitive offer in today's environment that have nothing to do with price, and a lot of them have everything to do with how you structure those contingencies. So make sure you check out that video right up there. It will give you a bunch of information on how to keep yourself protected, but write an aggressive offer at the same time. So I hope you found this information useful, and until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and I'll see you on the next show. Bye, everybody.